Thanks again for joining. Today, a huge thank you to our team at Croatan Institute for helping coordinate this. In a moment, my colleague Liz Umlas will be introducing the panelists. First, I wanted to go through a couple of reminders. We will be recording this webinar, and you'll be able to access it after the fact. We'll be sending out an email to all registered participants and posting it on our website. You can use the Q&A function to submit questions. We'll be sharing some of the response notes after the fact, but the Q&A portion, that's an additional 15 minutes at the end of the hour, after the close of the hour, will not be recorded. There is closed captioning and transcripts available in your menu. And we will not be allowing in any AI note takers. As a quick disclaimer, this presentation is for informational educational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice, but we encourage you to do your own due diligence, and we'll even be sharing some resources for you to learn more about perpetual purpose trusts. First, I wanted to give, for those of you who are joining a Croatan conversation for the first time, I wanted to give you a quick introduction to who we are. Croatan Institute is a research and action nonprofit whose mission is to leverage finance to build social equity and ecological resilience. We work with investment decision makers and networks to support them in redirecting capital into regenerative and restorative investments. And we work with place-based practitioners and frontline communities to access the tools of finance that meet their needs and help support resilient and flourishing ecosystems and communities. Our programs include our soil wealth program focused on financing regenerative food, fiber, forestry systems. And our Reefs program is focused on racial equity in underserved communities and connecting them with capital and access to financial resilience, resources, and training. The Lab for Impact Finance was just launched this year. We're very excited about it. Extends our rigorous impact research, analysis, and insights that Croatan built its foundation on in order to advance a holistic total portfolio approach to activating investor capital for social and environmental impact. Our Croatan Conversations project is now going to be housed at the Lab for Impact Finance, and I'm excited to introduce you to our new director for the Lab for Impact Finance, Liz Umlas. The Croatan Conversation today that we're bringing you is really about bringing leaders that are working on the front lines of transformative finance, social equity, and ecological resilience into deep dialogue about these opportunities. And so excited that we have this great panel. I'll turn it to Liz, and thank you, and enjoy the conversation.
Thanks very much, Christy. Are you able to hear me? Great. Okay. Thanks, Christy, for the introduction. And I'm honored to moderate this Croatan conversation and to dive into a discussion with our excellent panel, whom I will introduce in just a moment. A quick note about the format of this session. So I will start by introducing the speakers, and then I'll turn it over right away to Natalie Reitman-White, who's going to set the scene for us and give us an overview of the perpetual purpose trust ownership model, so the what, if you will. And then we'll turn to an interview format where I'll speak to Malika, Michael, and Greg about their company's transitions, the why and how of their stories, and how they're modeling the practice. And then we'll have a final round with all four speakers where we'll talk about the role of capital and investors in all of this. And then at the top of the hour, we will end the formal webinar, but we'll have an optional 15-minute Q&A for those who are able to stay with us. But please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A throughout the next 45 minutes. So let me introduce our speakers. If you would like to see their full bios, you can go to Croatan's site, and we'll put that into the chat for you. These are organizations with whom we share values and other connections. Natalie Reitman-White pioneered the first perpetual purpose trust ownership transition at Organically Grown Company, which is a wholesale distributor of organic fresh produce. And she went on to be founder and principal at Purpose Owned, which is a firm that helps other companies make purpose trust transitions. Natalie and I were actually speakers on a panel at the original 2018 Croatan Forum, and we have watched her work evolve with great interest. Malaika Mafalala is Wealth Advisor and Trust Steward, and Michael Kramer is Manager, Director of Research and Trust Steward at Natural Investments, which is a mission-aligned financial advisor, and actually the first financial services firm to convert to perpetual purpose trust. And Croatan has partnered with Natural Investments in various ways in the past, and they have a great story to tell. And finally, Greg Curtis is Executive Director of Holdfast Collective. This is Patagonia's nonprofit shareholder. As many of you may be aware, Patagonia in 2022 transitioned into two entities, Patagonia Purpose Trust and Holdfast, which Greg will talk to us about. And as Patagonia's Deputy General Counsel, he led the company through its ownership transition. Patagonia is a current and past funder of Croatan Institute's work, and we are delighted to have all of you here. Our speakers have strong stories of purpose-driven businesses that transformed very intentionally to be able to continue their missions in the face of industry pressures such as consolidation and attempts to put everything through a profit lens at the expense of society and environment. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the big questions that Croatan Institute explores in its daily work, these are similar to ones that our speakers' organizations have also asked themselves. How can capital and decision-making be distributed in a way that creates and maintains a resilient economy? What does a regenerative economy look like, and how do we get there, including through changing entire business models? And I would argue that these questions are more urgent than ever. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to our first segment and turn the floor over to Natalie. Natalie, our audience today is broad, and not all of us are necessarily specialists in ownership models. So if you could briefly just set out for us, please, what perpetual purpose trusts are and why they matter.
Okay, and are we going to roll through the slides now, Priscilla? Great, thank you. Thanks, Liz, for that invitation. So first, I just wanted to start with some context about this conversation of ownership. So there's actually quite a shift in the business ownership landscape going on right now in the United States. I don't have statistics for globally, but there are around 3 million businesses that are owned by people over 55, most of whom have no succession plan. And while that ownership shift is going on, people thinking about what they're going to do with the future of their businesses, there's also more and more conversation about the role of business in society. Should it just be about shareholder value maximization, or should it deliver on other things that are good for society, good for the environment through its practices? And so there's this kind of shift going on amongst foundations, amongst investors, amongst business owners to say, how could ownership potentially be a lever for making positive change? How might I structure and shift my ownership to promote more shared wealth, to ensure more social responsibility over time? And we're also finding that these conversations have broad appeal, particularly forms of employee ownership and support for local business ownership is broadly appealing across the political spectrum. So what are the options if people are looking at ownership succession? They're looking at their futures. So, most common kind of historic option is family ownership. My kids will take over the business, someone from my family, but that's not always an option for everyone. Maybe the kids are too young, not interested, or there's the potential for family conflict. Okay, what's my next option? Well, let's look at maybe transitioning the ownership of the company to an internal sale, management buyout, an employee stock ownership plan. Those can be challenging if management doesn't necessarily have the means to buy in, or you're concerned that you might sell the company to the employees, but they might turn around and sell it on to the next buyer and take it away from some purpose that you care about. Okay, next option, let's look at selling to an external buyer. There's often, concerns about whether that new buyer will keep the company on track. So maybe I could gift my company into some sort of foundation, say the Newman's Own example, but there's a lot of complexity actually around gift tax and nonprofit zoning for profits. So next slide. Purpose trusts have emerged as a new option, as an alternative to those 4 previous options. And why they're appealing to some is that they are a way to really lock in the continuity and legacy of your business. So you can lock in the way the business is operated, who its suppliers have been, how it interacts with its customers into the DNA of the company for the long term, so that that won't change. It can ensure a permanent owner that will, you'll never have to think about ownership transition again. Essentially, you're designing an owner that will never die, never retire, and never need to liquidate the business. And it's a way to have the company be self-governed by the people working in the company day to day. And it's also a fairly simplistic solution in terms of not needing to do constant kind of valuation and stock transfers. So what are the mechanics of how this actually works? Next slide. So in a typical company, you have shareholders, which are humans that own stock or membership rights in a company, and they have the rights to control decision-making in the company, so voting rights, as well as rights to dividends or profits for the company, and the ability to sell the company over time for value. And the extent that they reinvest in a purpose beyond just maximizing their own share value is really at their discretion and their choice. And to the extent that they share rewards or governance with other stakeholders, again, is their discretion. Next slide. What a purpose trust does is it replaces human owners with a trust as an owner. And it's a particular type of trust. It's a trust that says the assets that are held in that trust, so the company, need to continue to stay focused and benefiting an ongoing purpose. The trust, unlike a human, doesn't need any income, so it doesn't take any dividends or profits, or very limited for administrative expenses. And it simply holds the governance rights of the company to ensure that the company stays on track with the purpose. So what happens with the money the company makes? It's still a for-profit company. The company reinvests the money in itself and distributes it according to the purpose laid out in the trust agreement to benefit employees, the community, other stakeholders, even the planet. So this is the basic mechanics. You're shifting ownership from a person to a trust. So I'm going to pass it on to our panelists to talk about how they've used this design in their own context. I'll just say these trusts are really values neutral, so it's really about the purpose and the stakeholders that you want to benefit that you design in, and we'll talk about how the folks that we've brought together today are using it, particularly for environmental and equity outcomes.
Thanks very much, Natalie. That's really helpful. So just pulling a few threads. Ownership transition is a big question today, it seems that there are various alternatives that may have positives and negatives, but that the perpetual purpose trust actually addresses some of these challenges and also appeals to a broad spectrum. Really interesting that the trust is the owner. Let's dive in now to our interview segment. So turning to Malaika and Michael and Greg, the first question I want to ask for both of your organizations is, why did your company transition, and what were the specific problems that you were seeking to resolve in making this transition? So let's start with Malaika with Natural Investments.
Okay, great. Thank you, Liz. Let's see, we have a slide here. And so I'll just start with the slide as a way of, I want to give people kind of a grounding in our firm's uniqueness, and in order to talk about the problems we were facing and why we made this decision ourselves. But our firm is an SEC-registered national investment advisory firm that has been focused exclusively on socially responsible investing since its inception. And we were founded by a single founder, a pioneer in our field named Jack Brill in 1985. And over the years, we've grown to a team of 20 advisors across the country, and we manage just over 1.9 billion in client assets on behalf of individuals, families, and institutions that are really committed to socially responsible investing. Our firm had written 3 books over the years on our field, and we were the first to produce we created the first rating system to assess the social impact of socially responsible mutual funds in the US. We spent many years developing the culture of our firm towards one that is collaborative, with mutual support and a lot of advisor autonomy, things that are on the rare side in the investment advisory field. And I see that we actually successfully navigated two transitions, in that our founder, Jack, took the first route that you described, Natalie, where he was able to pass on his practice to his son. And so his son, Hal, joined together with our current managers, Michael Kramer and Christopher Peck, in 2007 to become equal shared ownership and managers of the partners and managers of the company. That worked well. Everything was going along swimmingly. But as Hal approached retirement, the firm was looking for ways to really share and spread that ownership across the team. So in 2017, we brought in 3 additional partners, myself included, and we 3 new partners bought out each 5% of Hal's shares. That worked quite well. And our group of 6 owners and partners, side note, I was the only woman and person of color on the team at the time. But an important note, because it was really something that it was an important value to the firm to take a pathway that actually opened up leadership and governance to a broader range of our advisors, with gender equity and racial equity as a central concern. And as the years went by, and as Hal approached retirement and was really ready to let go of the rest of his ownership shares, our firm had grown so much by bringing in new clients and new assets to manage, that the reality was the price of those ownership shares had become prohibitive for our new advisors to buy in. And we realized, we are facing a very common problem in business succession. It's common to many fields, and specifically within the investment advisory field, there are certain issues that have led to a very common outcome, which I'll describe. So the advisory field, just like Natalie mentioned, we are facing a silver tsunami. The average age of investment advisors is 60. So there's a real need to figure out succession. And yet, let's see, in 2023, DeVoe & Company, which is a researcher in our field, surveyed advisors and learned that 82% of advisors were looking at their teams. And even though the majority of advisors really believed that the best way of doing succession was to have internal leaders step in, the reality was that 82% of them looked at their team and realized that it was going to be very difficult or impossible for their younger members to actually financially afford to buy out founders. And so the most common outcome is to merge or be acquired by a larger firm. And mergers and acquisitions have grown tremendously in our field. It is the most common way of managing succession. And aside from age, another really important descriptor of the investment advisory field that is a problem is that on the racial and gender equity front, our field is woefully out of balance. I have some statistics from 2020, hoping that there's been some improvement on these statistics, but here's the reality. Over 80% of advisors are men, less than 20% representation by women. And on the racial demographics front, in 2020, Cerulli found that 2.9% of advisors identify as Black, 5% as Hispanic, and just over 4% as Asian. So there you see, it's this very unrepresentative field. And so if succession isn't carefully planned for and well in advance, and potentially thinking outside of the box, individual firms really run the risk of succumbing to the continued consolidation of our field in ways that uphold that status quo that I've just described. So our firm spent well over 2 years really thinking about our conundrum and how we wanted to proceed. We prided ourselves on being an independent firm, really willing to stand at the forefront of socially responsible investing and community and regenerative and impact investing. And we had put a lot of work into building a diverse team. So we intentionally grew our advisor base by bringing on women and people of color. Today, we're a firm where there's 50% representation by women, 25% representation by people of color across our advisory firm. And we had this deeply held value of expanding ownership and governance across our diverse team. So it was really important to us to preserve these firm cultural characteristics. And we really didn't want to be the next independent advisory firm to be acquired by Goldman Sachs. So we want to do everything we could to avoid that potential outcome. And in 2018, we actually got to know Organically Grown Company because we brought our clients along to support their goal of seeking mission-aligned financing to support their transition to a perpetual purpose trust. We were very interested, and we got to know their team, of which Natalie was a member. It planted a seed for us about a new potential pathway for our future. And so when we were really ready to take that on, we spent 2 years really diving in to learning a lot with alternative ownership advisors at the time, and now purpose owned. And we loved that a steward owned company is really designed to stay independent with its purpose safeguarded by stewards of the company who shepherd the health and vitality of that enterprise. And we really saw the opportunity to crack that standard capitalistic mold and become a model of a company that is self-owned, preserving our independence, and managed by people who are actually deeply connected to and committed to natural investments, culture, and firm, and not reliant on external, possibly not mission-aligned outside investors to support our succession. So overall, it was really important to us to ensure that we were able to expand governance without putting a financial burden on our younger advisors, and to really ensure that we were able to build out a firm that maintained and grew our racial and gender diversity over time with this shared ownership model, this shared governance model, and this sharing of profits across our team. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Michael?
Not now. That was perfect. Thanks.
Okay, great. So that's why we did what we did, the problems we were trying to solve. And I'll pass it on to you, Greg, to share about Patagonia.
Thank you, Malika. That was there's so many commonalities and themes between the journey that you all experienced. So that was wonderful to hear. It also took us about 2 years of planning to figure out our evolution as well. Patagonia is an outdoor apparel company. We've been purpose-driven for more than 50 years at this point. And before then, Yvonne was the owner of Chenard Equipment Company, which made alpine gear and climbing equipment, and similarly purpose-driven as well. We've been on a journey like natural investments for many decades, trying to on the product side, always trying to make things better, improve, evolve. And I think from the ownership perspective and other activities that we do within our supply chain, how we make decisions with our profits, how we deploy those profits, how we engage with our employees, on-site childcare, the communities that we live in. We've always been evolving on that front as well and trying to improve. And that curiosity and that mindset has really driven a lot the innovation that we've gone through over the last 50 plus years. And it's really been a journey from trying to make products that impact the world less, trying to use our profits that correct some of the externalities that an extractive economy generates, trying to deliver more resources to the communities that create our products, mobilizing the grassroots environmental community and other businesses to support that work, and engaging with a multi-stakeholder capitalism community as well to try and involve ownership models. 1% for the planet, the B Corp certification are two examples of communities that we've engaged strongly with, that we believe in, that we're also examples of Yvonne Chenard's attempt to try and find structural commitments and structural solutions to permanently dedicate Patagonia to committing to do what it does and never changing and wavering in that focus on mission. We've always been a family-owned company, fortunately, so we've never really had to compromise with external voices that might put pressure on us to do business differently or make different decisions. But at the same time, like Malika described with natural investments, there was still succession issues. And as we grew older and grew more successful and had the chance to have more impact in the world, Yvonne was also getting older. And so questions around succession and how durable as a benefit corporation at the time when I joined the company in 2014 was that really, and were there other models that we could look to assure Yvonne and the family of the outcomes that they were seeking. And at the same time, as a environmentally focused organization that's very deeply concerned about climate change and the biodiversity crisis, he was looking for more resources to deploy to do more of this work at scale with the time that he has left. And so it started a process on the heels of COVID. I think we were all kind of thinking a lot of different thoughts about COVID, but he wanted to do more and he wanted to act. And, it's a significant mortality moment for all of us. And so it got everyone really thinking about, okay, we need to solve these questions that we'd been trying to figure out the answer to for a few decades. Like natural investments, we'd seen the OGC transition, and one of my roles when I was with the business was always trying to pay attention to different structural solutions that we could use when the inevitable question came or the demand came from Yvonne to figure this out. And we were immediately attracted to Purpose Trust because of the perpetual nature of it. I mean, I think the innovative novelty of the structure was just viscerally, for me as a corporate lawyer, I was really attracted to it. And so I had a lot of conversations with different people about how you could use it. We were also looking at other models. And so we had these things in a library on the shelf when the question and the ask came. And so fundamentally, we wanted to achieve two things. We wanted to deliver more resources for the environmental fights that were important to us as a community. And we also didn't want Patagonia to change. We didn't want Patagonia to, whether it was because of motivation to generate more profits just to do the philanthropic work, having other investors as part owners in the company that might push us to be more profitable for their own personal financial return. We really had to balance these separate but important goals of assuring that Patagonia would never deviate and delivering these resources. And so we immediately knew that we were interested in a purpose trust. It was just a question of like, what was the right vector to put the control in that trust? And what was the right balance of resources? Natalie mentioned at the beginning that this is very customizable. It's very neutral. You can all use it for whatever purpose is important to you. For our model, we didn't need many resources within the purpose trust itself. It needs funding to do its mission. It needs funding to be able to potentially litigate against Patagonia if it found that Patagonia was deviating from its mission. So it does need to have resources. The most important thing it needed was direct control and complete control over the business so that if there were an issue, it could reach in and course correct the organization. And so we fine-tuned the allocation of profits from the business, what's legally available to be distributed from Patagonia. 2% of those resources, when declared, go to the Patagonia Purpose Trust. 98% of those resources go to this nonprofit shareholder that we created to facilitate all of the impact work that we are seeking to do around the world through our community. And so for us, it was really around all of these things that Patagonia was already doing, on-site childcare for employees, sort of benefits that we deliver for our workforce, benefits for our supply chain partners, our commitment to our footprint with our product, innovating supply chain, innovating materials, decarbonizing our supply chain, all of these things, 1% for the planet, commitment by the business would all stay the same. Those were all examples of things that can't change without the Purpose Trust agreeing to that change, which it will never do. And for the balance of those resources, we can amplify the impact of this whole ecosystem through this nonprofit shareholder. And in this way, we turn Patagonia into a perpetual business to do what it does in the world. And the value that it creates as an engine creates all of this external work that we're using to correct the extractive economy that we're all living in. So it was a great tool. We were inspired by the work that OGC and Natalie's colleagues were able to do, which was a real gift, and we learned a lot from it.
Great. I'm hearing some common threads here: safeguarding purpose, legally protecting the permanent mission, addressing things like lack of racial or gender equity in the field, using profits to correct externalities of business, using business to engage the community. These seem to be, common threads running through. And one quick, maybe follow-up question to all of you. Were there other models that you considered, like ESOPs? I mean, that's something that comes up a lot as a a potential format for transition. Were there, as just a quick follow-up, were there other models that you considered and rejected out of hand?
Totally, because it was actually part of our journey with alternative ownership advisors or purpose owned, is that they actually took us on a learning journey and shared with us several different models, including like the golden share model, cooperatives, even a couple others I'm not going to remember quite right now, but each one has its unique characteristics and its unique ways of addressing particular pain points. And it just was so that the purpose trust was the one that most resonated with us and most addressed our particular pain points and the uniqueness of our business entity. That's why we went with it.
The same. I think Malika, you said you had a 2-year process. We had a 2-year process as well. I would say the first 8 months was really, for me, it was the most exciting and the highest risk, because it was all traditional M&A, traditional capital market exit, minority investors, purpose trust model, and just the charts that we would have of the different benefits and challenges of all of them. So it was a really, I think Yvonne didn't enjoy it because I don't think he really enjoys talking about corporate structures, but for the corporate lawyers that we were working with, it was a really, and the stakes are high because whatever, you're trying to discover, and sometimes clients aren't very, forthcoming, or they may not really understand what truly is motivating them. So part of our process, in addition to weighing out these benefits of different structural solutions, was just trying to tease out like the truly distilled criteria that we were trying to measure success against, to also map that too. So it was a really constructive process.
Great, thanks. My second question is about outcomes and impacts and changes that you've seen since the conversion. So yeah, if you could maybe take the audience through that. Michael, do you want to start out?
Sure. Happy to. So we've coming up on almost 2 years since our first trust stewards were elected. And, as Malika said, it was so expensive for young people to buy in, and we really wanted to decouple governance from ownership, from the financial. And so we wanted to give people the ability to have power, to have decision-making authority without having to go into debt to earn the right to do that. And so that's exactly what has happened. And it's been really wonderful because we instantly were able to change our leadership dynamics. As Malika said, we were, 20% female, 20% people of color, and now it's completely different. It's 43% female right away. We have 7 trust stewards and 29% people of color. And so we were able to instantly do that from the moment that we elected trust stewards. So we provided some continuity. Some of the experienced former partners did migrate over to become trust stewards, but we were instantly able to bring in a bunch of new people and change the leadership dynamic instantly. And of course, it changes how you make decisions. It changes how you think. You have different perspectives, and it's much more reflective of who we actually are as a firm. So that has been very satisfying. Wait, go back to the other one just yet. I'm not quite ready. I did want to speak to the control issue, which has come up earlier, because, there are lots of, we get offers all the time for people who want to buy us and who want to invest in us. And you lose control if you do that. You know, there's always strings attached, and we didn't want any strings at all. And we were fine with borrowing money in order to finance this, which we'll talk about in a bit. But we did not, we wanted to maintain our autonomy because our culture is so important. And I'm sure if you're a business owner or you're part of an organization, what you've created, the culture that you've created, deserves to be preserved, and it can instantly disappear through a transaction like this if you become a small part of a larger entity. And all kinds of guarantees are made in these types of transactions that, oh no, we'll let you be who you are. And all you got to do is look at what happened to Ben and Jerry's to know that doesn't always happen. You know, a conscious company can become part of a conglomerate and they don't have the autonomy, and it can create a lot of tension. And we didn't think that was something our clients wanted. We have over 1,300 clients, and we certainly didn't want it. And we've watched our peers in our industry have this happen to them, and then they're stuck because suddenly they're part of something that isn't aligned with who they are. And that is something we wanted to avoid. The other thing is obviously the pressure to sell. You know, we're never going to have to do it again, and we don't have any pressure anymore. So the relief valve occurred, and we are able to buy the firm from itself, and that has been successful, and we've been able to actually do what we thought we could do in our financial models. We had to spend a year doing financial modeling to take a look at how this might look given cash flow, given you have a waterfall for your cash of how are you going to handle the debt financing and pay off these former partners, and you have to really make sure that it's going to work. And what I can say is that it is working, and it's working exactly as we had hoped. So far, so good on these 3 points. Let's move to the next slide. The other 2 points, democratic decision-making. So it used to be that the amount that you owned of the company determined your voting power. I was a 1/3 owner. I had 1/3 of the voting power. That's gone. So now it's one person, one equal vote. So each of the 7 trust stewards has an equal vote. Nobody has more power than anybody else. The other thing is that our advisors elect the trust stewards. They're not appointed. It's an election, and everybody serves a 3-year term, and anybody can be a trust steward as long as they've been with the company for a few years. So the opening up of leadership opportunities is just really amazing, because it really reduces the us versus them, the management versus labor, a lot of these hierarchical dynamics that can exist in companies. If anybody knows that they could potentially have the power, people really feel like it's their firm. And that was the goal. We wanted everybody to feel like, yeah, this is our firm. It belongs to all of us. And we all have a say in how it's run. And that feels really good to have that. Not that we were really hierarchical before, because we liked to make decisions by consensus as much as possible, but still the power dynamics were what they were. You know, there were 2 of us who owned 2/3 of the company, and we could overrule whatever the group consensus was if we wanted to. And so this structure changed all of that, and it actually felt really good for me on a personal level to give up some of that power and to share it. We're much stronger with shared power than we are when it's consolidated. And then the equal profit sharing, that is so, we just made our first profit sharing distribution after the 2024 year. And even though our advisors have different size practices and they bring in different amounts of money to the firm, we codified in our trust agreement that everybody was going to get the same amount of profit sharing, no matter what their size of their practice is, whether they're brand new or they've been around for 30 years. We felt like if we really want to invest in the future, we have to provide outsized benefits, if you will, to the younger people just getting going, and not simply consolidate more wealth with the people who've been around the longest and who already have accumulated a lot of wealth. So we wanted to level that playing field. And that was controversial, but we did get to that place of wanting to do that, and we just did that. And it also begins right away. You know, if you just start as a brand new advisor with us, you still get to benefit from the whole. So that has been really wonderful, and it was a big motive for why we wanted to do this. And so far, so good. I'm really happy that we were able to do it.
Thanks, Michael. That's really helpful and interesting that you had an instant change in leadership dynamics to where you wanted to be, but yet preserving other things like your culture and mission that you didn't want to go away with the transition. So it sounds like you got all your wishes granted in this conversion. Greg, how about you? What have been some of the outcomes and changes that you've seen in the conversion?
Well, Michael used the expression pressure to sell, which definitely, resonates. For us, it was a little more, at the time we went through our process, Yvonne was 84. And so there was always this, and him being this very sort of iconic founder who's present every day in our lives as a product developer, and steward for his whole lifetime here. So what's going to happen after Yvonne? Like what happens next? How do we survive this shift, this change? And so this structure was our answer to that question. And so when we communicated it, we frame it as our Earth being our only shareholder. This is now the answer for, inevitably we all are human, and there are sort of natural consequences to that, but what it means for this organization and how we can orient ourselves to our mission and our North Star. We have that map now, and we have that structure. And so that gives everyone a lot of, it doesn't, there's a personal level to it that, the structure is never going to come close to, but it gives us a guide, and we know what we need to do. And so that really helped for our organization to kind of help navigate future challenges. On the Purpose Trust side, I mean, the structure is working amazingly well. It's complicated. Our structure is a little more complicated than maybe some others because we've got this Holdfast Collective sort of component to it, which involves several trusts. But the Purpose Trust itself, Patagonia, has been navigating a challenging outdoor apparel market the last several years, navigated it better without making choices that some of our peers have made. So we've been really successful on that front. We've had the opportunity to motivate everyone that works at the company about what all of it means, how our structure works, how they all contribute to it, and what we use those resources for. On the Holdfast Collective side, we've deployed at this point about $130 million worth of philanthropic resources out to our community for nature-based solutions for climate change, program support for partners all around the world in our communities, marine protected areas, election of climate leaders, and when necessary, litigation support for folks who are trying to defend our environmental regulatory framework. So it's worked phenomenally well. And the most encouraging thing I would say is that it worked well right out of the gate. And so it's only going to improve. It's only going to operationally be more effective at deploying resources and finding the opportunities that are most valuable or most urgent. And on the Purpose Trust side, we have a philosophy that those decision makers use, inspired by Yvonne, to make decisions today to protect the core mission of the company. And it's something that future leaders for that and stewards for that trust will be able to use as a reference point when he's no longer here with us to guide them.
Great. So just a clarification question with Patagonia Purpose Trust, the employees stayed on, right? That didn't change.
Oh yeah. No, it was there was nothing has changed in our business. It's just that the ownership level, where it used to be owned individually by family members, now it's owned by this Purpose Trust. Control is in the Purpose Trust, and economic benefit for the business flows through to the nonprofit shareholder. Okay. 98% of that economic benefit.
Okay. And I want to come back to the point about fighting climate change. So this is central to Holdfast's mission. How are you dealing with the headwinds against fighting climate change, and does being a Purpose Trust make that easier in some way? Or does it change it?
I don't think the Purpose Trust, there is a unity between these structures. We've got this mission-driven business that can't change without really a real departure from purpose by the Purpose Trust, which will never happen because the people who manage that as stewards wouldn't do it. But even if they were, and we didn't get into this structurally, but for many of these Purpose Trusts, there's another role called a protector or an enforcer, an independent individual that is able to hold the trustees or the stewards of the trust accountable for the mission of the Purpose Trust. So we have another, like a super steward, I guess you could say, that kind of monitors the monitor. And so in that sense, that doesn't change. But there's a real, locking in Patagonia for its mission. Mission of Patagonia inspires the philanthropic work, and the philanthropic work of Patagonia inspires the philanthropic work of the collective. It's not the work that we do on the nonprofit side is it has a relationship with the Patagonia philanthropic work, but at a much different level, and it's not burdened. The ecosystem is not burdened by any kind of requirement to work together. We find opportunities to amplify, and we do a lot of independent work. So it's very it's like a family, I guess I would say. It's like we're all sort of siblings, and we have a common parent in a way.
Great. So I will, let's see, maybe probably turn to our final question and bring Natalie back in. So for all of our speakers, our audience includes capital providers, and capital obviously has a crucial role to play in shifting not only individual companies, but also arguably sectors and the whole economy to more sustainable regenerative models that are effective for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And so I wonder if you can all talk about the role of investors in supporting this, and how you financed it, and how you engage mission-aligned capital. And maybe Natalie, you can start us off, and then maybe Greg and Malika and Michael.
Sure. Well, the way Organically Grown financed its transition to Purpose Trust is probably the most complex example. So bear that in mind when I explain it. And I have a slide. I don't know if Patricia can put that up. But essentially, you had asked earlier about what else we had tried. So OGC started as a nonprofit and decided the best way to promote sustainable agriculture was to be a for-profit to help the farmers make a living growing organic. Became a farmer cooperative, then decided over time that it wasn't just the farmers creating the value, the employees too. So it was jointly owned by farmers and employees in an S corporation. At some point, there was a limit to 100 owners in an S corp, and OGC had way more farmers and hundreds of employees. So we converted to an S corp, and we added on an employee stock ownership plan. So we had tried many things. So when we decided to go with the Purpose Trust, because we were tired of kind of this treadmill of who would be the next owners of the stock, and can we continue to afford to do this, which was basically our problem, was it was getting too expensive to continue to transition the stock to again and again at fair value, because there were lots of people who wanted to acquire us and our value was going up and up. We decided, let's be done with that. Let's transition all the ownership to Purpose Trust, never have the ownership transfer again. In order to do that, we had to pay for the value once. So it's kind of like paying off your ownership, paying off your mortgage. You have to find a way to come up with the funds to pay it off once. And then once that is paid down, then you're done. So Organically Grown did that through a combination of things. So we put forth a tender offer to our existing shareholders, which were the farmers, the employees, with some cash from the balance sheet that we had. We also took on some debt from RSF Social Finance. So it was like kind of bank type debt, traditional debt, but they're a socially responsible lender who wanted to support this transition and were quite flexible on working with us on the terms. And then also we did a seller agreement with our existing shareholders. So they took a note in exchange for their shares that we would pay them over a period of years. And the last thing we did was we actually issued a new class of stock. So the trust holds all the control, but we have a non-voting preferred stock that we made available. And we have, I think, over 90 different investors, from family offices to individuals to foundations. And it's a stock that you get a dividend right, but it doesn't appreciate in value. So you invest $5,000. When you want your money back, you get $5,000 back. But while your stock is in, you're earning a dividend on that money. So we had cash from the books, bank debt, seller notes, and investor financing, with the Purpose Trust having full control over the company for the long term.
Great. Thank you. Greg, do you want to go next?
Different situation. I think we ended up being in a position with the company being closely held for 50 years and no debt or anything like that. And the family was fine. So they were in a position to make tax-free gifts of non-voting stock to the nonprofit shareholder. And Yvonne made a taxable gift of the voting control, the voting stock, to the Purpose Trust. So in that sense, it was simpler. But I mean, I think, you know, what Natalie just described sounds pretty complicated. But, you know, like I mentioned this earlier, these M&A deals, like any transaction, there will be, you know, people might say like, oh, you can't do, or nobody knows what a purpose trust is, or it's too complicated, or this or that. It's like, well, when you get under the hood of an M&A deal, it's pretty complicated too. So it's like, you know, sort of don't believe the hype necessarily, but, you know, take it just, both are serious and one-way roads, and narrow your options. And so be really thoughtful about, you know, your service providers that help you and where you want to go. I think from what Natalie shared, the most important, and I think Michael and Malika have seen this, like there is a class of investors who are really interested in supporting the transition of businesses into these models, and there's an opportunity for them to get a return for it. So I think it's there, it's available, it's growing, and I've had a lot of conversations since we've made this change with investors who are trying to learn more so that they have access to those opportunities, whereas other investors might be more standoffish. So
Great, thanks. That's really helpful. Malika and Michael.
We have a slide too, Priscilla, that describes, we have 3 buckets of finance that we did, one of which is very similar to what Organically Grown did. After having an independent valuation, we borrowed 25% of the sale price from RSF Social Finance, another community development financial institution that's been around for over 40 years and had the resources and interest in investing in alternative ownership models. And then the other 75% is largely owner financed. And that's because we just didn't have the cash on hand. And that's the truth for a lot of businesses. They just don't have it. And so we have the debt payments to the outside lender, and you know, we did a 5-year note, and then the other 2 buckets are promissory notes to most of the former partners. Again, term notes at an interest rate, and they're fixed and also 5 years. And then we have an earnout portion, which is the more flexible, risky portion that basically is an annual amount determined by the trust stewards depending on the profitability of the company. So there's a possibility of that changing as the company grows. There's a potential for some upside for the former partners, but there's a ceiling and a cap on it, so we're not gouging the company. But it provides a lot of flexibility, whereas promissory notes don't have any flexibility. They are locked in. So we wanted to give ourselves some flexibility in case there's a bad year, and if there's a great year, then we have a formula for how much goes to earn out to the former partners and how much goes to profit sharing. So there is a formula there that's codified so that as the profit margins change, so does the debt service and the payout. And we had to model it out over many years. You know, it's going to take years to facilitate this completely. And that was okay with us. We're at an unusual situation. None of us left through this transaction. We're all still here. And so, of course, even if we did leave, we'd still be locked into this agreement to pay us. But it was okay with us to stick around and be paid over time. And so that's how we decided to do it.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. Well, we're at 2 minutes of the hour, and there's been a constant stream of discussion and questions going on in the chat. And so we have at the top of the hour, we're going to go into an optional Q&A session. I want to turn it over to Christy for a couple of last items, but just from my side, obviously business transition is an increasingly important question. There's many alternative ownership models out there, but perpetual purpose trust seems to answer a lot of the thorny questions that all of you have grappled with. And our speakers' stories, I think, provide real encouragement that transition can be done in a way that preserves mission and that redistributes benefits and governance fairly. And I hope that you have taken, as the audience, have taken inspiration from these cases. We will share resources. Thank you, Malika, Michael, Natalie, and Greg. And I will pass it on to Christy for a couple of last items, and then please stay on for the optional Q&A if you can.
Thank you. I just wanted to also, as we're turning and Liz's questions in the chat and the Q&A box, want to thank again all the panelists. I think as a Croatan Institute is a cooperatively run, democratically decision-making process for a nonprofit. We kind of focus on that sort of collaboration. So seeing the values alignment with this model is really great to see. I really enjoyed this conversation. I want you to know that you can connect with us to learn more about the content that we're providing through the Croatan Conversations, as well as our research and active work on the ground, in particular in the Southeast, but really we've worked across the US and internationally as well. If you could go to the next slide. We're really, if you learned something new today, we really welcome you to make a donation. 1C3. Welcome collaboration on future conversation topics and collaboration across our work. So take a moment. If you don't mind, fill out the form, the Google form that is in the chat right now. It'll take about 2 minutes. Whether it's before or after the Q&A, that's fine. We'll also include it in the follow-up email, which will have the summary of the Q&A. Able to stay on for that. Really appreciate you. And moving back to Liz. Thanks so much.